Hello everybody, this is Christian back from Blue vs Orange TCG, coming back to you with another video. This time we're going over a video similar to the Seeker's Companion video that I did a few months ago now, but it's going to be a little bit less in depth. There's been a lot of new players coming into the Discord lately, looking to learn, pick up the game, seeing exactly like how people are playing, and I wanted to present more beginner or newer player friendly level content for the channel. That didn't already that my channel doesn't necessarily have already. Most of my content's like put out there expecting you know a fair amount about the game. But I wanted to kind of change that. I asked on Facebook, I asked on Discord for some newer players what people wanted to see, and one of the big ones was videos helping show synergy between different cards and like battle cards and characters, and like how that goes into play with deck building. So we're going to be going over we're going to be trying to do some new content like that, and we're going to be starting off this video here talking about tanks, like the tank archetype, the tank trait. If you're a new player and you're interested in learning exactly everything that kind of encompasses the tank archetype, and like what support exists for it, well, you came to a good video here, right? I want to try to keep these pretty short and concise too, which my intro is not doing a good job showcasing that, but excuse me, but that's okay. We're going to jump into it right now. So tanks as like an archetype, usually from wave that came like all the way from wave 1 to where it is now with like custom sets, they always had the same style of play where like they're typically big hulking defense characters, right? They tend to have a lot of HP, or not a lot of HP, a lot of defense. Early on they actually had a very low amount of HP, but early on when tanks were introduced, that low HP, even with the high defense, really pushed them out of being able to be playable. Like people talk about all the time from back in the day how people just wanted playable tanks because tanks are really cool, but there weren't a lot of playable archetypes for characters and battle card support for tanks. Now I don't think that's true at all. I think there's tons of great stuff for tanks, especially in the ATP custom card sets. So going over the battle cards that it supports tanks, there's 5 altogether that directly support tanks from the wizard from waves 1 through 5, and some are much better than others. I'm going to be going over which ones are good, which ones are bad, and what actually makes them good and bad, because that's another thing that people want to hear. So going over the cards I have laid out in front of me right now, the first one is Crushing Treads. It's a orange utility, put on tanks only. The upgraded character has Pierce equal to its defense. It's a very mediocre card. Why is it mediocre? Well, usually your character would have to have at least 3 defense to make this comparable to other upgrades that give you Pierce. So things like Piercing Blaster, even which gives you 3 Pierce. A lot of weapons often just have 2 Pierce natively to add it on to their like weapon text. And another thing is like the utility spot is incredibly important for a lot of characters. So to play things that boost your health, to play more utilitarian things such like Spy Satellite to help get rid of Brave and Stealth on your opponent's team, having your utility slot be used to give yourself extra Pierce, and that's pretty much no other addition like given to your character, is really weak. This card really doesn't see any play, but I want to go over exactly why it doesn't see play. The next card we're going to be talking about, this one's a big one. This is Composite Armor. So this is a card that got introduced in wave 4 of the WotC set. It's an orange-black, +1 attack, +3 defense. So it gives a ton of stats off the bat as an armor. You can only put it on tanks, and then when the upgraded character defends, scrap this card after the battle, and then if you flipped at least a black, that battle will do 1 damage to the attacker. So this is actually a really excellent card that most tank decks, if you're playing really into the tank strategy, is going to be playing quite a bit of. And why is it good? For one, even though it falls off, so you don't get to keep it around after you defend with it once, just having the extra 3 defense is actually going to make it so that if a character, oftentimes when a character would have been KO'd from an attack, this creates a problem for your opponent to have to deal with. They'll have to either figure out how to get rid of it, or if their attacks doesn't end up finishing off, you get an extra attack out of that character. It's really important for that way, and it's also like a decent like minor aggressive play as well, which is like kind of the best part about this, to where if you have like a turn where you want to defend, like make sure your character survives and outlasts a turn, you can play this on them and you still get an extra attack. So you actually get an extra bonus to your damage output for that turn as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean like, in comparison to other cards, like a card in Wave 1 called Blast Shield, which is similar to this, but it's blue, it gives +2 defense, and it just falls off after the battle. You have to spend your whole turn defending for that, and a lot of aggressive strategies can't really do that, like can't slow down your game plan by having a turn where your upgrade for the turn is just going to be for defending. You have to push damage. The +1, it's not like a huge push, but it's there, it's comparable. And the extra flip a black on defense, your opponent takes 1. It doesn't come up a whole lot, but when it does come up, it does come up. It's really nice, and it's a great just little extra tack that they threw onto this really, really strong tank support card. In comparison to the next armor, this is Scout Armor. So Scout Armor, I think for the net, we'll end up talking about it a couple times in the future because it just hits a lot of different tribes. It's a blue-black from Wave 5. You can only put on trucks, tanks, rectors, or Constructicons. It gives +1 defense, and when the upgraded character is KO'd, draw 2 cards. So this is easily the worst tank support card of the list here, even worse than Crushing Treads. And why is this worse? Because there's tons of things in the game that give you +1 armor, as is even just like an armor, right? You have composite armor that gives you +3. There's certain blue-green armors that can potentially give you +2 when defending against a certain trait. That's really common to see. And the benefit of having to draw 2 cards, your character has to die for that to happen, and it's very rare for card effects that trigger off of a character death. It's very rare for card effects that trigger off of character deaths to ever become like really relevant or useful in a game, because by that point, you needed those cards when you played the card, not when your character is down, right? This card's not really not that good. I would not recommend playing it if you were looking to play tanks, even if like you're looking for like blue-black Pierce tanks. It's still just not worth it in my opinion. And then the other like really good tank card. This is also a plane support card. This is 2-pronged attack. Essentially, you choose one of your characters. If it's a tank, your opponent discards 2 cards. If it's a plane, your opponent chooses a character and does 2 damage to it. This card's really cool. There's actually a lot of like discarding strategies that you can layer into a tank build if you want to go that route, and this is a great card to do it. Just being able to say, just get rid of 2 cards. It can be really like detrimental to certain decks, and especially like when you have guys that have a lot of defense already. Making them discard 2 cards and making them just run out of plays to play often means that your characters are going to be surviving a lot longer than they normally would have otherwise. And there's a character you're going to be talking about that plays to this really, really well, especially. So, like I said before, I mentioned there was 5 main tank support cards that directly relate to tanks, to the tank trait, and I only have 4 here. Well, the 5th one is the big one. This is the big one we're going to be talking about. This is Hunker Down. So Hunker Down is a blue pip action that when you play it, you flip each of your characters from bot mode to tank mode. Then for each of your tanks that isn't upgraded with an armor, put an armor on it from your scrap pile. This is definitely one of, excuse me, I gotta take my hat off, it's getting warm here. This is easily one of the strongest battle cards ever printed in the game in my opinion. It does so much. A lot of tanks have really strong alt mode, flip to alt mode abilities that trigger when you play this card. You could potentially, if you have a team of like 3 tanks and you play this card and they don't have armors, you could potentially just put 3 upgrades onto your team, just from playing this card. And even though it's like a blue, even if you're playing an orange tank strategy, the card is so good you don't mind playing the blue in the deck. Like that's how good this card is. It triggers when played effects on your armors. It can get around certain requirements for some armors that we're going to be talking about. You can play there's just like a ton of things that this card can pick up and do for the game. It's one of those big like tempo power pushes that certain decks like wish they had, but being able to like have this in tanks is incredibly strong. And it's strong enough to where like even like if you have only 1 tank on your team, there's some decks that have succeeded just playing 1 Hunker Down in their list just because they can just play it and flip their tank and then get a free armor on there. It's a level of like scrap recursion that didn't exist in the game for a long time. Now there's more of it that exists, but this is really like a unique thing of its kind, especially for Wave 1. And it just kind of shows that this card has seen the test of time. It's going to be good later on. It keeps getting good every time there's more armors printed, and it's always going to be there for tanks. But to go over exactly like what cards are like good to hunker down, because like there's a lot of armors in the game, right? There's a lot of things that you can put into your tank's deck that you want to try to reach for hunker down, but none of them is always going to be the same level of power level, right? You know, what's the difference between playing a hollow matter projector with hunker down versus a regenerative core, or maybe a reinforced plating versus a ghost shield, right? Like what makes me, like when I'm considering playing hunker down in my deck, what cards do I need to think of and what makes them good? So to kind of go over that, right? So there's like two main things that you want to be thinking about when you're thinking of like grabbing an armor with hunker down. One, is there a on play ability that's going to trigger and progress my game state in whatever way I'm looking to do that with? So that can be things like the top cards above. Rapid Ascent, if you put this on a ranged character, your opponent chooses a card in their hand and scraps it. So again, we're going back to that discard strategy. You can play a 2-pronged attack one turn, and on the following turn you can hunker down, bring back a Rapid Ascent, and force them to scrap a card from their hand, and you get a +1 defense. Scrapper Gauntlets, being able to put this on a character and either scrap an enemy weapon, kind of putting your opponent back a step, or if they don't, you just get to draw a card and essentially netting you that card back that you played from hunker down, the card you play from hand, which would be the hunker down. Guardian Shell, similar thing. You play it, you get to draw a card, but then you also could potentially remove it or play another armor over it to heal 1. So that's like a big thing with hunker down, being able to just find armors that have on play effects that progress your board state. That's like really, really big there. And then the other thing that you want to be looking out for is cards that may not have on play effects, but are kind of the best defensive capabilities that you can put onto a character, right? So I'm thinking of things like Force Field, being able to play a Force Field from your scrap, essentially forcing your opponent to have to deal with it or only take 4 damage, and again, surviving is really important. Superior Plating and Ghost Shield. These cards are kind of special. So they both have very specific play restrictions. Play this only to replace an armor on a character that has no armor slots, or play this only if you play Tech Research that turn. Why do I have these cards listed here is because hunker down actually gets around these play requirements, because hunker down specifically says put, it's not play. And Wizards of the Coast ruled that when you play hunker down, you can take the superior plating that's in your scrap pile and put it on a tank, or the ghost shield and put it on a tank, even if there's no armor on that tank, right? We end up, and because of that, you end up getting these really like the top end of defensive armors in the game, right? It's the reason why you wouldn't want to play reinforced plating in your tank list, because you can just hunker down a ghost shield and get +3 defense, right? That's like the main thing that you're going to be wanting to look out for the other side of like the hunker down armors, right? Then there's tons Hollow Matter isn't in the picture here, but that's another great one. It only gives you +1 defense, but it prevents you from taking non-attack damage, so it can keep a guy at like 1 or 2, keeping him from dying outside of combat, which is like really, really important. These are obviously there's more than just these 6 armors that can be played and do well with hunker down. But I just wanted to show you some examples and explain kind of the thoughts that I go into when trying to pick these armors for hunker down, and let you guys explore and see what other things that you think are going to be decent based off like the idea of, does it have a really strong on play effect that helps progress my game state, or does it just have the best way of keeping my character surviving over the course of the game? Alright, so that's the battle cards. Going over some of the tank characters. Again, there's a lot of tanks that I'm not going to be covering in this list. It's not going to be as in-depth like the Secret Compendium is. But I do want to go over some really excellent tanks that a lot of people, when playing tanks in their decks, immediately jump to, because these are just like excellent characters, right? So the first list I got here kind of like like middle sized characters. So we have Darkmount here, who is a wave 1 rare, who really is not that good of a character on his own, but paired with the ATP 1 stratagem that a lot of people play with, he becomes this absolute beast of a character. So in his alt mode, when you flip to it, you get to scrap a card from your hand. If you do 2 damage to an enemy, being able to play that with hunkerdown to get an armor, scrap a card, and then deal 2 to somebody. It's incredibly strong. His stratagem makes him a leader, which is important for a lot of like tank strategies because a lot of tanks end up being leaders. So there's a lot of leader battle cards that you can play with him as well. And then when you put an armor on Darkmount, you're a pair 1, so you can hunker down, get an armor, heal 1, toss a card to deal 2 to something. There's a whole lot of different things that this guy just ends up doing. He also gets +4 health, so his absolutely atrocious 9 health becomes 13, which for 10 stars is still like kind of low, but way better than it was before, especially with the defense boost and the repair that he gets here. So that's a really strong tank option that people like to use as well. Another one is going to be Impactor from ATP 3. He's pretty much got it all. He's a leader, wrecker, tank, and range, so he covers a ton of traits right there. So he actually synergizes with a ton of different battle cards. 4-14-2, bold 1, tough 1, and at the start of your turn, you may do 1 damage to one of your wreckers. That includes him. If you do 2 damage to an enemy, that has at least 10 damage. And then on his other side, he has 5 attack, and then bold 1, pierce 1 to each damage wrecker that on your team. So he really isn't a flip intensive character, which is like why people love running Impactor so much. His stats are just excellent. His alt mode ability, he tends to want to stay in alt mode quite a bit because his backside usually is only for like a big burst of damage at the end. But being able to like stay in this mode, hunker down in armor, deal 2 to something that has 10 or more, potentially killing it out of combat, it's just excellent. Another excellent character here. You can play Darkmount and Impactor is a really common composition for tank decks called leader tanks because they're both leaders, and you end up being able to play a 6-star with them, which has a lot of different synergies there, but we're not going to get into that too much today. The other tank that a lot of people like to play that's kind of a smaller mid-sized tank is Captain Impactor. He is actually a card from Wave 4, who does have a stratagem. I didn't include it in the list here today. I probably should have. I'll tell you a little bit about it anyway. So he's a 3-12-2, 7-star, flip to alt mode, bold 1 to your team, and then in bot mode himself, he's a 4-12-1 and just has bold 1 himself. He's a really simple character, but his stats are pretty decently efficient for his cost, especially when you include his ATP 4 stratagem, no matter the odds, which make him a wrecker. And if you have another wrecker on your starting team, you get to increase your starting star limit by 1, so you essentially get the star back from the stratagem. if you have another wrecker, and then he gets an extra defense. So now he feels a lot more like a true tank, even actually more so than the regular Impactor, because now he has 3 defense. Oh, and he gets an extra health. So with the stratagem, he becomes a 3-13-3 in alt mode, which is really solid stats. And again, he becomes like an actual wrecker with the trait, so now you have the other wrecker options there. You'll learn that tanks actually have a lot of different synergy, like the vehicle traits especially tend to have a lot of synergy with other traits, so you can kind of mix trait battle decks a little bit. Some other like bigger tanks, so like some centerpiece tanks that have higher star costs. One is Lord Megatron. I forgot to put his stratagem up here as well. I apologize. He also has an ATP 2 stratagem. So he's a 6-17-3 12-star that when you flip to this mode, your opponent scraps a number of cards from the top of their deck equal to his character's defense. And then in bot mode, he's a 4-17-2, who when your opponent shuffles their deck, they have to put a damage on one of their onto one of their characters equal to Lord Megatron's attack. So he ends up having like this really big like, oh, I have to put like 4 damage on somebody because I shuffle my deck, or like I have to put 7 if he has like a grenade on, or if he has a weapon on him. It's a really interesting character, but with the stratagem bow before me, that makes it so that when he's upgraded with a Decepticon upgrade, he gets +1 attack, +1 defense, and anytime a Decepticon on your team flips from alt to bot mode, both players have to mill the top 3 cards of their deck. It's really strong, actually. It hasn't seen a whole lot of play recently, but it's actually like, but like the effects themselves are pretty decent. being able to hunker down, because the way the triggers order, you hunker down, resolve that first, put an armor onto Lord Megatron, so like a composite armor, and then you activate his all mode ability, which causes your opponent to scrap 6 cards from the top of their deck because you have the 3 from his all mode and 3 from composite armor. You can speed up the deck really fast. It's a really cool deck, and I think it's a deck that if you're really interested in a different approach to a tank strategy, I definitely check this out. We have Overlord here from ATP3. He's actually a tank in a plane, which is the character that I was talking about earlier that really pairs well with 2-pronged attack, because you can choose him, and you get both effects from the 2-pronged attack. They have to discard 2 and they have to put 2 on somebody. And he's also a tank in plane in his bot mode as well, which is really interesting, and for 14 stars makes a lot of sense. He's really big into star cards too. When you play him, your deck can have up to 3 extra star cards of differently named cards of one of your battle icons, so like Bolt of Lightning, Leap of Faith, and maybe like an Aura of Dominance, right? And then when you flip to this mode, you reveal the top 5. If there's a star card there, you grab it. And then in bot mode, he actually has an Optimus Prime Battlefield Legend ability, where every time you attack with him in bot mode, you flip your cards for attack, and you get to play a star card that you flipped off your flips. And he also gets +1 attack for each character in both players' KO zones, so he actually gets bigger as the game progresses in bot mode. Really cool character. Excuse me. Really cool character. Because he's 14 stars, you can't pair him with a whole lot of other tanks, so he tends to just play himself as the only tank. But again, a lot of the tank support cards are strong enough, so like you could play 1 hunker down, you can play the 1 composite armor and still look really good, and you can play like 2 to 3 2-front attacks, and it's just an excellent way to start playing like a big boy tank deck. And then the other one from ATP5, this one's kind of a different take on it. This is Double Dealer, who's actually a triple changer. He has 2 other modes here that interact really well with Legend mode characters. But the main mode we're going to be looking at is this Alt Mode 1, which is a 5/15/3 leader tank range. So he's actually a tank in this mode. Enemy Autobots can't use Brave or Stealth against this guy, which is sweet. And when you flip to this mode, reveal the top card of your deck. If an enemy is in Legend mode, you may play it. Otherwise, put it into your hand. If you don't know, Legend mode characters are a new character type that ATP introduced. They're really strong. And this card definitely like kind of mercs them a little bit more. Basically being able to hunker down, get this guy in armor, and reveal the top card and either play it or put it into your hand. Essentially netting back the card that you get is really good. He's a mercenary, so you get to play different mercenaries board cards like Opportunism, Opportune Offensive, even Dual Wield if you want to. Really interesting take. I think this guy is actually kind of, he's usually played outside of like tank shells, but it's definitely an approach that you could take with this guy that I think would be really cool to see. All right, so that's essentially the video. This one a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but that's basically everything that you need to get started when building a tank deck. Obviously there's lots of different tank characters that I didn't even talk about today, but the battle cards, the plays that you want to be making, what they kind of tend to go over. This is essentially a great starting point if you're interested in learning that different archetype. You guys leave a comment in the description below, in the comment section below, if you like the video, what other traits that you would like to see this style of video for in the future, and I'll see y'all next time. All right, take care.